There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel and another book haul. Let's get going. Don't need any more preamble than that. The first one I purchased last year. Just haven't finally getting around to hauling it. It is volume 3 of the trilogy by the gay British writer Adam Marnes-Jones called Caret. I read the first two, which were published some years ago. The first one in the series is Pilcrow, which I absolutely loved, and Cedilla, the second one, which I liked but didn't love. And now here is the long-awaited finale to this trilogy, which is about John Cromer. He was born in the 60s, I believe the 60s, in a time where society, probably anywhere in the world, but certainly in the UK, was not very enlightened when it came to disability. He developed a condition. I must say, all these years later, I've forgotten the exact nature of that condition, but when he was a very young boy, he developed a condition which took away his mobility, and he spent most of his childhood institutionalized with full mental capacity, so physically immobilized. And that volume 1, Pilcrow, was about his life there until about the age of, 12 or 13, in various institutions, and the flowering of his gay sexuality. It was just an incredible novel. The second one, which was about John Cromer's university years, didn't quite hit me the way the first one did, and I'm very curious to see what the third and final volume, Caret, is all about. And this is set in the 70s when he's at Cambridge, and I assume beyond. It was published 2023, and that's when I got it. Let's hear the first paragraph. Knife, fork, and spoon, the basic equipment. Eating irons, as some people call them, as my dad called them. In terms of acquiring cutlery, I didn't do badly out of my 3 undergraduate years, from 1970 to 1973, at Downing College, Cambridge. If that was the point of the exercise, then I did better than most. I ended up with a useful haul. It wasn't that I was greedy, I don't think. I didn't want a 6-piece place serving, let alone 12-piece. I wasn't planning dinner parties or dainty lunches and punts. Everything was for my own personal use, to borrow the formula that defendants of the period fell back on when they were caught helping themselves from a smorgasbord piled high with illegal drugs. In my case, though, it was true. I wanted a single knife, single fork, single spoon, nothing else. One of each item, but they had to be the right ones. So I think that the second volume, Cedilla, covered those 3 undergraduate years at Downing College, but I could be wrong. So if he's still at Cambridge, it was probably be moving into graduate studies, but we shall see. Next is a book that was on some prize list or other, and I don't follow prize lists particularly, but I think it might have been the Booker International long list, maybe. And this is a Zimbabwean novel called Avenues by Train by Farai Mudzingwa. Look at those end papers, hey? Gorgeous cover, published in 2023. I believe this might be his debut novel. It begins with childhood trauma and carries on from there. That's my plot synopsis. And I'm not going to read from the opening chapter because there's a lot of words in an African language that I wouldn't know how to pronounce, so we'll just leave it at that. I'd be interested to hear from any of you who have read this, and lots of you follow prize lists, so you may well have. Oh, there's an embargo on my revealing to you who recommended this to me. That embargo may well have been lifted by now, but I'm not sure, so I'll err on the side of caution and just say somebody that was reading this book because they were judging a book prize recommended it to me very enthusiastically. It's a gay novel from Scotland called The Old Haunts by Allan Radcliffe. I think you could probably call it a novella, 151 pages, also published in 2023. And I can't wait to read this because the person who recommended it to me knows my taste very well, and it's a gay novel from Scotland. The protagonist is recently bereaved, staying at a rural steading. Does anybody know what a steading is? In the heart of Scotland with his actor boyfriend Alex. That's all I need to know. Here are the opening few paragraphs. The opening chapter is called We Don't Drink Beer. After the house was sold, we drove north to Almry, a cinematic place at the western end of Loch Tay. My head had been full of grey, a sky with no sunshine, and Alex thought the change of scene might help turn me back into myself. It was March suddenly. The year was pulling at its reins. Alex had surprised me with a crumpled printout, brandished like a long-stemmed rose. He knew our destination well, having grown up nearby, and he knew that I had taken that holiday there with my family. So it was a meaningful place for both of us. We kept pausing on the drive up so he could get out of the car with his camera and marvel at all his old haunts. Well, I love the writing, and there's the title, The Old Haunts. Next is a non-fiction fictional hybrid written by the Calgary writer Betty Jane Hegerat, who has been on my channel as a mystery guest. I'll link to that chat because she told me about this novel, this book. I think it's her most recent one. One of her most recent ones. No, it's not her most recent one. It's from 2011. This was published in 2011, and Betty Jane described it to me in that mystery guest spot chat, and the premise was just fascinating. It's marketed here as fiction, from Ulachan Books. I think I'm just going to have to read the first couple sentences of the synopsis, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to describe it very well, but you'll find more about it in that chat. As Betty Jane Hegerat struggles with a new piece of fiction, she recalls an infamous murder case that shares many similarities with the story she is proposing to write. 50 years after the trial of Robert Raymond Cook, Hegerat re-examines the evidence from this grisly crime for which the accused received the death penalty. She is both repulsed and intrigued. So it's kind of it's a memoir with the novel embedded within and details about this trial. And the most interesting thing she told me about it was that it really screwed her up to write it. She hoped I would read it, so she sent me a copy, which she signed. I highly recommend reading this one in the sunshine. All the best, Betty Jane. So I must read it. I was talking about it with Barb Howard the other day, and she said that she considers it to be Betty Jane Hegerat's best work. I'll read the first two paragraphs, the second one of which is quite long. The chapter is entitled The Boy, and then the date is June 1994. Louise hates these end-of-school celebrations. What she really wants is to go home and have a glass of wine in solitude. But always there is the round of drinks with her fellow teachers, the very people she's looked forward to escaping for 2 months. As the evening wears on and the pub gets noisier, she waits impatiently for the woman who's giving her a ride to tire of the forced hilarity. There is a man at the next table who seems as much an outlier to his party as she is to hers. He looks familiar, but she can't imagine where she could have met him. Chronic tan, crew-cut hair, that way of looping his arm over the back of the chair so that he looks mildly amused but not really part of the company. He reminds her of the farmers in her extended family. The waiter, she's noticed, has refilled the man's glass of Coke as many times as he's filled hers. A teetotaler? Or the driver for tonight? He looks up and catches her staring. Winks, then tilts his head and seems to puzzle a minute. Finally, he nods, puts his finger to his lips, and stands up. Without a moment's thought, Louise stands too, and follows him to the end of the bar. No one at either table seems to have noticed. They're leaving. Well, I want to keep reading. I hate murder mysteries. But what I say often when people press me on why do I loathe murder mysteries, one of the biggest reasons is that I can't stand the way murder is talked about as a plot device without any real convincing character work or emotional dimension that shows how murder affects people who are left behind. I'm gonna guess this book is gonna do something along those lines. I can't wait to try it. Next, I have a play by 3 playwrights. 2 of them are Indigenous and 1 is settler. And it's called Reasonable Doubt. The playwrights are Joel Bernbaum, he's the settler one, Lancelot Knight, and Yvette Nolan. Joel Bernbaum, born and raised in Saskatoon, the only child of a Buddhist mother and a Jewish father. Lancelot Knight is a Plains Cree singer-songwriter from Saskatoon, and Yvette Nolan is a playwright and director. She was born in Saskatchewan to an Algonquin mother and an Irish immigrant father and raised in Manitoba. And they have written a play about one of the more recent tragedies in the genocide that Canada has been perpetrating on Indigenous peoples for centuries, and that was about, let's see, 10 years ago, a few more, maybe 12 years ago, when a Saskatchewan farmer on his farm shot a young Indigenous man dead who was among a car full of Indigenous young people who had, and if you believe the Indigenous side of the story, which I very much do, they were looking for help. They had a flat tire or they were out of gas, but I think they were also had been drinking, and the farmer felt threatened, and he fired his gun, and Colton Bushy was killed. There was a trial, and he was acquitted. Like I say, it was one of the more recent injustices that make reconciliation seem like an empty word in Canada. And that farm was about an hour's drive from the farm where I grew up. So this play is about the crime in the trial. The reason I'm aware of it is because when I went to hear the Métis writer Maria Campbell do a performance and a reading a few months ago, one of the things she read was from her introduction to this play. The excerpt she read to us from the introduction is too long to read here. I will read the first page of the script. Act 1. Scene 1 is the court, and the first character here is Dan, who is described as in his 60s and white. Dan. I'm from North Battleford, Saskatchewan, and I attended them all, every day. I was, a seeker of the truth in this whole thing, right? And so I decided to go to all the preliminary hearings and caught myself with a spot in there. I wanted to know what it really was that went on out there that day, And now introducing two more characters. The judge, who's in his 60s and white, and Denny, who is in his 50s and Indigenous. Denny's holding up an eagle feather. Judge. Sir, I notice you have an eagle feather there. Denny. Yes. Judge. Would you be kind enough to explain to me the purpose and what that would be? Denny. This eagle feather here represents the truth and justice. I'll leave it at that, and can't wait to read it. And based on the opening few paragraphs of Maria Campbell's introduction, that also is a incredibly important part of this book. And last but certainly not least, here is a novel by another one of my recent mystery guests. I think she would now perhaps call herself a Saskatoon writer. She is currently the writer-in-residence at the Saskatoon Public Library, Meredith Hambrock, and here is her debut novel, Other People's Secrets, which I bought so that I can read it and chat with her about it in a future video. I will put a link to our mystery guest chat, which was fabulous. She's such a fun, vibrant, interesting guest to have that I'm going to be featuring her as often as possible. She's decided to stay in Saskatoon after her writer-in-residence gig is up. And this novel, the first time I saw her and heard about this novel was when she was on a panel with Sharon Butala at the one-day Saskatoon Literary Festival called Word in the Street about a year ago. Didn't think the novel sounded like it would be for me, but the more I talked to her about it when she was on my mystery guest spot, I thought, I have to try it. And one of the things was it's been marketed as a mystery, and she has taught me a lot about how genre is really nothing more than what the publisher decides it is that might sell the most books. And that she said there's many ways to read this, and it isn't particularly a conventional mystery. So with that in mind, I'm going to give it a try. The protagonist is kind of a messy, maybe an alcoholic woman. Her name is Baby. She may be an alcoholic, or she may just drink too much, whatever the difference is, who has an on-again, off-again boyfriend. She's living and working in a crumbling lakeside resort with two friends. And there's some drama around her adoptive mother, who is ill, and then there's a local drug kingpin, and that's all we need to know, I think. She wrote in her, when she signed my book a month or so ago when we met for coffee, "To Sean, I hope you love my bad baby and don't mind the mystery." I'll read the first two paragraphs of the prologue. The city was heaving hot, sun-baked and panting. Sanitation workers had walked off the job 6 weeks previous when the union couldn't reach a deal, and black bags of garbage were tossed over park fences, cooked in piles for 8, 9, 10, 12 hours a day, leaving the air smelling like a hot banana. Here, on September 1st, just a few minutes after 7 o'clock in the evening, the dumpster baby, pink-skinned and screaming, was discovered behind a grocery store. nestled on a bag of flamin' hot Cheetos. For a brief moment, just after she was pulled from the trash, the dumpster baby was considered a miracle, a tiny screaming wonder, stared at by a pack of grocery store employees who stood in a circle around her, cooling, waiting for an ambulance and the police to show up, to take this distraction elsewhere. Once she was taken into custody, leaving the cellophane Cheetos bag behind, she became something unremarkable. Another orphan Jane Doe, case number 45BN6AB9. Dropped into the system, bundled in blankets, passed between hands as papers shuffled from one county to another, until finally she was adopted by a grizzled woman in her early 50s named Hannah, who lived on the edge of Bitboro Lake, 4 hours outside any sort of metropolitan center, 8 hours from the dumpster that delivered baby onto this world. Well, that's quite beguiling. Loved the writing. That's what I got. Thanks for watching.